Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the SFIA monthly livestream Q&A. We'll get started in just a moment, but go ahead and start getting your questions in the chat window, so our moderators can start relaying those to me as soon as we start. Please try to keep the questions concise and watch your spelling, and try to be polite to others in the chat. We usually go for about an hour, so you probably want to grab a drink and a snack, though we'll take a break about halfway through, too. With all that said, welcome, and let's get started.
And welcome to our July 25th live stream for Science and Futures with Isaac Arthur. I'm your aforementioned host, Isaac Arthur, and we're joined today by my co-host, my lovely wife, Sarah Fowler Arthur, who will be asking us questions. And she has her eyeglasses on today, or sunglasses on today, because she got stung on the face by a bee, which happened to be last week. I am sunburned. So we're just getting that out of the way as we get questions in for the audience to be asked, and we will go ahead and start off with one from last month.
Yes, our first question is from ATWWA, and thank you for the super chat. Their question is, are we even getting close to understanding gravity and dark matter?
It depends on what you mean by getting close to it. These days we tend to know what the effects mostly are of dark matter and dark energy, but when I was going to school, there was still a lot of debate about what dark matter was, though it hasn't really changed that much. We've narrowed it down a bit more. But it was pretty much accepted and has been probably for a couple decades before that, where it was just taken as a given. Dark energy that was just getting discovered. We were just starting to figure that out. And 20 years later, mostly what we made is progress theoretical and a little bit more conforming stuff to say that it's happening. We've had a lot of supernovas that are mostly what we're counting, but we can only really refine our data for a lot of that by counting supernovas, and we can't rush those. At the same time, because that's how we measure the real distances, at the same time we really are no closer to being able to say what dark energy really is, other than maybe the space or the energy of space-time.
And we also had a super chat from France Cadet, and thank you for that donation. And he says, what is the right way to imagine the Big Bang?
You know, one of the popular examples they like to do is take a big bread thing of dough and raisins in it, and you cook it and it expands. I've never entirely liked that, but the basic notion of being a Big Bang is don't think of it as a big explosion. Think of it as a very hot gas that was inside a very tiny vessel, and the vessel itself is expanded, so the gas has had a chance to kind of expand and cool around. That's the basic notion that's going on there, but the expansion, that vessel, that is what your dark energy fundamentally is that energy of space-time. As time moves out, space expands, and that's the energy of it, we believe, loosely.
And Smiley Face says, do you think the Expanse universe is more likely to be what humanity will look like in the future?
The Expanse, for everyone who does not know what that show is, I still haven't watched the last season that came out, but I read the first few books, and I've seen the first few seasons, and they are more or less the same, but what we know about that setup, usually what people mean by that is, do you think that's how it's going to roll out, with Earth having this overpopulated kind of mess on it, and Mars being a rebel colony that's its own very powerful government, and then the asteroid mining belts are very, poor and dilapidated and oppressed and full of terrorists and pirates? And the answer is no. I don't doubt people in the future will say, help, help, I'm oppressed. But at the same time, Mars is never going to be the other big power. This is not 40K or the Expanse. That's more likely to be the Moon or something like that if it's going to be anybody at all. But the big other powers are still going to be on Earth. Mars is never going to be a singular powerhouse, that I would guess. There's no reason for it to be. Maybe Venus and Jupiter and all the others will be big players in the game, but Earth is going to be your great big power, and everybody else is going to be farther down that list for eons to come. Well, at least thousands of years.
Here's one from today with a name as long as the question. Technological singularity with Anmol Gupta with the Galactic Domination wants to know, the Galactic Laboratory will be the last episode of the Galactic Domination series. Will the Galactic Laboratory be the last episode of the Galactic Domination series?
It's the last one that's actually written at the moment. Whenever I do a new series and actually call it a series, I always have at least 3 videos in mind before I declare it to be a series. Kind of like we did with the weaponizing, colonizing, and I can't remember what the other episode was. An episode on black hole ships, but colonizing black holes and weaponizing black holes, and that's all we've done on that series, so it's just a trilogy. But until I have 3 topics in mind, I won't actually declare something a series. Usually before the first one comes out, I've written the first 3 episodes too. I haven't decided what episode 4 will be, or when it will come out. We have a list of topics that Jerry Gurn and I had come up when he suggested the series to me, kind of as a tongue-in-cheek thing while we were editing. I can't remember what the other video was at the time, but he gave me a whole list of potential topics that he thought of. I've had a few more I came up with, and those 3, though, are the ones that we kind of start off with. Were I think Empire and Toner was the one I came up with originally, and then Strip Mining Galaxy and Galactic Laboratory, both his ideas. But those are written, and the video for Galactic Laboratory is on my computer waiting to be released next week. So that's the last one that's actually written and planned at this time, though.
Kellen Wong says, is there any plausible way besides fictional physics, virtual worlds, and boarding raids that would force us to go back to fighting at closer ranges, both in planets and in space?
Sure. We kicked around a few scenarios for things that would actually allow melee combat, for instance, in our Force Fields episode way back. I'd reference that one to you for some idea. But, people say, well, in the future, you're never going to have any reason to do any of that close range stuff. And so that's what they said 100 years ago. When we were getting to the point where artillery and airplanes were just so dominating the battlefield, you couldn't imagine why you'd have anyone rushing forward with guns in the future, let alone up close and personal. Yet we still do that. The majority of combat these days takes place at a very short range. That would just mean like police, occupational forces in war zones, etc. High intensity warfare is all at a distance, all very high energy as it were. That's your bombers, your artillery, etc. But there's so many other things in the future that could kind of keep it close range. But the biggest one is, are you willing to just blow the heck out of stuff? And if the answer is no, if you don't want to level that city or blow up that space station, then you're going to have to get boots on the ground, even if they're robot boots. And so then how you do that's mostly going to depend on the available technology. See the Force Fields episode or the Planetary Assaults episode for a little discussion of that.
Exoplanet 2020 says, how many people could live in an O'Neill cylinder before too much waste heat makes it uninhabitable?
Depends entirely on how big the O'Neill cylinder is. Like if it's all the way upgrade to a McKendree cylinder. Usually on the show, when I say O'Neill cylinder, I am thinking of the big version, not the McKendree, but the biggest of the ones that he discussed, which is 32 kilometers or 20 miles long and 8 miles in diameter. I don't know off the top of my head what that is in kilometers. But 5 would be 5. No, maybe like 12 in it. Either I'm getting that one backwards. Whichever the case, that's like the size of a county, And if you want to double layer that, then you need to cut your lighting down if you want to have 2 stacked layers on there, because otherwise you're going to heat up. It's going to be perpetually new. Inside those, if you have that much heat going on all the time, if you're cycling days and so forth, it's going to heat up. If you want to be Earth-like, then you can only have 1 layer before you have to start introducing cooling systems. But there's no actual limit on how many people you can put in one. A McKendree cylinder could have billions, and then it just depends on your cooling technology and how active you want to go with that. Personally, I don't think you really want to do too many layers. Probably at most a dozen. So,
circling back to traveling through outer space, Joachim Heitman says, do you have any interesting thoughts on the billionaire space race?
I'm glad that's going on. There really only are 3 of them involved in that, Richard Branson, Elon Musk, and Jeff Bezos. And there are countries that are still obsessed with this too. It's not like it's just those 3 folks. They are all 3 of them folks who are very good at, I don't want to say the kind of the Thomas Edison and Tesla approach of being successful with their technology as inventors or as promoters of invention, but also being very good at talking to the public about it and building up enthusiasm for it. So I think that skill just happens to kind of coincide with them being billionaires to some degree. But I don't think it was a billionaire space race. I know people are trying to characterize it that way. I don't think that's a good idea to kind of do that, because it's going to make it seem like Bezos versus Musk versus Branson, and that is, this is not even SpaceX versus Blue Origins, etc. This is us trying to get out there. This is a team effort, And the space race had its advantages back in the day, but right now we should be thinking this is a relay race of a lot of people working together to get it done, not a competitive competition to see anything other than who gets the biggest trophy, as it were. Well, everybody gets to celebrate at the end.
A relay race is an interesting thought. The Canadian wants to know how massive something needs to be in order to hold things on its surface.
That is kind of tricky. We discussed that a little bit in the micro black hole. No, sorry, in colonizing black holes and in mega Earths. We discussed how you calculate that a little bit better for the miniaturized ones. There is no absolute maximum, but your key thing is the escape velocity at the surface. Needs to be a order of magnitude higher than whatever the surface temperature's root mean square speed is, or you'll be gassing out constantly. And the escape velocity is actually less than the root mean square speed of all those warm air particles moving around, then any puncture, all the air is just gone instantly. But how you actually get that escape velocity up to that level, you can get pretty condensed. You could also, just put a glass shield around the planet to keep it in there and go into a relatively low microgravity setup too. So there is no minimum size for what you could actually hold things down with gravity at, that unless you want to get really into where the gravitational cutoff is for, like, I need to have at least 0.01% gravity or something like that. But pretty small. You can make a microplanet around a black hole, an artificial black hole, obviously, that is in the O'Neill cylinder class or smaller. To that point of being maybe even like a Kaplana or Gateway space station level of internal space, only a sphere.
The K2 Despot says, "Hey Isaac, would you ever consider doing a video talking about the physics and possible technological applications of topological defect phenomena and magnetic monopoles and cosmic strings?"
Okay. I am actually not a big fan of magnetic monopoles. I know that a lot of people feel they're very critical to, I say the standard model, but to a lot of the cosmological models, and there's a good case for it. But I really tend to feel like if you can't find it in nature, and I know someone's going to point out the top and bottom quark weren't found in nature, but if you can't find them, create them, etc., if you can't figure out what the stats are going to be on them, it starts getting really dubious. We should take as a given that they're there. Cosmic strings, which are kind of like probably the best analogy would be a one-dimensional black hole instead of point like it's a long line. Those I can't really see a case for either. I'm not sure why they wouldn't collapse, But it might be fun to do an episode on them at some point. That means it's solid enough basic theory.
So thank you, Winton Ashley, for your super chat, and he wants to know if you think negative friction could be a thing.
I'm not sure what negative friction would be, really.
Probably the same thing as negative cookies.
Yeah, I guess probably. So whenever you start talking about negative quantities, you have to start thinking about which particular quantity is going to negative. Like Terry Pratchett, author of Discord, had a great example of this in what he called anti-crimes. He said, the exact opposite quantity of something has to be a little bit different. So an anti-crime isn't a truly kind and across-the-board benevolent act. It's when you still feel like a victim afterwards and someone's done something nice to you. So breaking and decorating, where you break into someone's house and redo their place. You've done a good deed by them, but they feel very violated by it, would be the opposite of breaking and entering. White mailing, which is when you threaten a mobster by threatening him to inform everybody of his good deeds in secret, thus ruining his reputation of being a hard guy. Negative mass. People say, well, what would negative mass do? Well, negative mass, if you push on it, should actually push back, should push back against you as well. It doesn't go flying. It should have negative momentum towards you. So if you push it, it goes flying towards you. That doesn't really make sense, though, does it? So it's negative friction. Friction slows you down. It's the effect of ramming into infinite millions of particles over and over and over again that's slowing down. If you're running through a cloud of negative matter, presumably the exact opposite should happen. You should be getting sped up. Every collision, every random collision is somehow assisting you to move faster. On paper, that works. You're sliding along a surface as an ice skater, and you accelerate just by being there. In practice, that really doesn't make a lot of sense. So, maybe, but that should be the effect. As you roll across, it would speed you up.
Joe Flo says, where do you think manufacturing technologies are going in the near and mid-term future?
I don't think they're converging specifically so much as I think we're going to see two major areas I'd say that we'll probably see a split out to. One is going to be that extreme standardization, banging out, highly automated, where it can just bang the same product out over and over and over again at highest quality really fast. Another is going to be the things past, we need to be able to change, we need to retool fast, and will be the emphasis on how quickly can you retool your factory or your production line to produce a new widget with excellent production quality and minimal time loss on teaching, education, all that around that. What lets you switch over from being able to produce one day soda cans, the next day shampoo bottles? Just because there's something that's needed for this one brand new shampoo bottle and they need 1 million of them within the next week. What lets you suddenly convert from being able to do production of, to use COVID last year and the great toilet paper shortage, what allows you to convert from being able to do production of paper for a copier to toilet paper? What lets you be able to switch over to producing masks from those just real quick? And that's probably going to be one of those big areas that goes forward. I know the customers say more robots and more 3D printing, and absolutely, yes, both of those things will feature in there, but always not so much the method, but what is the main goal. It's like what Henry Ford used to say, if you ask people what they want, they'll tell you they want a faster horse, not a car. Whether it's got more robots or 3D printing, what you're really looking forward is how do we produce these products quickly and quality with very little short notice? Or how do we produce this one object we all know we need abundantly quickly?
Welcome back, Isaac Bordeaux, and he wants to know if you have read The Case for Space.
By Rob Zubin. Yes, he had The Case for Mars. Before that, I'm having problems remembering specifically what was in The Case for Space, though. But if you've not read Rob Zubin's book, I guess The Case for Mars is probably a little dated now, though it's still a good read. Another great book by him, Merchants of Despair. Great book. He's a great writer, and I would highly recommend almost any of his books to you, but that's a good one, too.
Your follower. It says, yes, that's the actual username, your follower. What would be some similarities and differences between Age of Ocean Exploration and Age of Space Exploration?
Less pirates.
I don't know. Space pirates might be a thing.
Well, we had the Space Pirates episode a few years back, and I think that was one of my favorite episodes to do. Space Pirates. Biggest thing with the Age of Sail is once you're over the horizon, no one could see you, and you didn't know what was on the other side. In space, you're always going to know where, before you get there, what the destination looks like, and not in the, oh, hey, we can see, 20 miles away because we have a very high mast on this ship. You're never going to know on an ocean because of that whole what's coming up. In space, you're always going to know before you get there what you're looking at. You're just going to get to know it better and better as you approach. Now, there's not going to be some surprises, but when it talks about exploring, that whole sense of wonder of being able to close over that one cliff or around that one bend and suddenly go, a beautiful new vista. That's not space, unfortunately. But that's the big difference between the two, the horizons.
Raven609 wants to know if you have any thoughts on speculative evolution.
I'm afraid I don't know what the term means.
Okay, then that would probably be a no. RoboGuy says, do you think religious aliens are realistic or just a sci-fi trope?
I wouldn't see why you wouldn't expect it. I guess it kind of depends on, let's see again. If you're assuming that they're like us in terms of that basic cognition concept, then you would expect them to have all the same traits that we had in terms of philosophy, right? They'd have differences, but that should be there. And that's just one example of that. So I would be very surprised if you did not see that trait.
Thank you, Merv Johnson, for your super chat today. And he says, as a crowd-funded AI, how is your new studio or lair?
It's a wonderful digital universe that we have set up here. Now, I am loving it. I'm going to skip on trying to shift the cameras around at the moment because I got them lined up. Sindri, Alex Long, one of our producers, helped me do the lighting last time around, and there's actually a map I used just for those occasions. For 2 hours every month, I actually set up for a live video stream. The rest of the time, it is my big desk, bookshelves, screens, and that's the way I like it. Quiet and
He wants to know if it has missile silos.
It does, yeah. Of course. But don't tell.
Bryce Hill, what planet in our solar system do you think is the worst to colonize or mine for resources?
I guess it would kind of depend on what you mean by it depends so much on what resource you want to get and what your technology is. If you're talking like which one has the least resources, then it would be Pluto, because Pluto doesn't have much resources, although there are other dwarf
Just
planets.
funny little dogs.
Yeah. Jupiter's got the most resources, but is the hardest one to actually access in terms of the planet. Well, on the other hand, its moons are very readily available. The planet that's probably going to be the most boring is probably going to be Uranus, I think. That or Neptune. Just depends on which one turns out to be slightly more valuable.
C.R. Smith wants to know how your beard looks so good.
Well, I was going to say by carefully dipping in hydrogen peroxide a day or two ago. So it's been a week of minor injuries around the house. I'd say I got stung by bees yesterday coming back from giving them water. We keep bees, by the way. The few days before that, I had, I had been chopping jalapenos, and I did. It was a very spicy one. They once well gone, and I went like that with my finger, and that washing off, and it just spread all over my face, just so much jalapeno oil, and I was dipping in like isopropyl alcohol and hydrogen peroxide to get it gone. I don't know if it was actually good for the beard. It might fall out next week. So, and then, one of our longtime sponsors. It adds a certain
glow, but it might not be the glow that your followers want to copy.
That's the sunborn. One of our longtime sponsors, Raycon, the ones that make the earbuds, I loved using them when I was out mowing the lawn. I have a riding lawnmower, and I can actually hear an audiobook while I'm playing them. I lost one of the earbuds. It's somewhere up front, and I'm not going to find that one, I'm sure. But so I got out a pair of headphones and said, like, oh, this is even more noise isolating, so it's just very large earphones, and I forgot to put on a hat because they can't fit a hat over the earbuds. So 4 hours of mowing the back lawn later, I was utterly sunburned and didn't know.
We were so happy to see the sunshine after a week of rain.
Yeah, at least a week. Good God, I thought I was going to have to build an ark. It was raining nonstop in Northeast Ohio for like 2 weeks. All right, back to actual questions.
That was an actual question.
Was it?
Yes. Another question comes from Claire Higgins. I'm a homeschooler. Can you give educational recommendations for my 12-year-old who loves all things science? We love your channel.
Speaking of sponsors, Brilliant is great for science content. Actually, Sarah would probably know better than me. We were both homeschooled, by the way. I was from age 10, but she actually did that for her and her younger siblings, and was on the State Board of Education for years. Any good suggestions? She's shaking her head no. For science education specifically?
Science for 12-year-olds.
Science for 12-year-olds. Brilliant really is a good one for that, but a lot of the channels do active experiments. Cody's lab, he has a lot of ones you can just do hands-on. He comes by because he keeps bees too. If you can find a copy, Gerald Walker's book, The Flying Circles of Physics, is full of high school, junior high level experiments that take up one page to explain them, and you can do like that, and usually on a budget of a couple bucks.
DeWall, thank you for your super chat. Have you listened to videos or read web stories of humans, space orcs? Fairly amusing and possible that most life evolves on planets like Mars, or is that possible? He says he figured he'd ask because humor is good.
Actually, look at that one real quick. Have
yeah,
you
I apologize.
The question's over on the side there, but it's really hard to actually read them off myself. The stories of humans or spacewalks. I feel like maybe something got lost on that one.
All right, what's your best stab at it?
Oh, okay. I think I got it. Okay.
Oh.
There are a lot of science fiction series where they adapt, fancy races, the orcs, the elves, etc., space elves. In 40K, the orcs migrate from planet to planet on asteroids or cloud things and all these spore-based things. They're not actually a normal life form. They're a fungus. And there's often been the thought that maybe life spreads throughout the cosmos like a spore or or fungus on the panspermia model. I don't consider that to be one of the more likely scenarios. It is on my third or fourth in terms of it's possible, but not really a lead candidate. So depending on who you're hearing from, it's either a valid but not too strong theory or complete nonsense, but it kind of depends on which version people are going for. And if I completely misunderstood what your question was there, sorry.
Chromageddon, thank you for your super chat of $10. And Chroma wants to know if a black hole engine can be used as a shield during high-speed interstellar travel, or at least to get one going and follow it, or maybe using one as an Aldrin cylinder.
Aldrin cycle?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry.
No
My
problem.
eyes are swelled shut.
But you got sunglasses on, too.
Yes.
This comes up a lot as people say, can I use a black hole as a shield? Not a classic one. A black hole that has a with just like this arm, arm length, right? Like this size. I have to contract them to on screen. So, okay, because it's much lighter now. This would be like the mass of Mercury. One out here would be Earth. So, all that mass is in there. Very, very tiny shield, right? Apologies in advance of my off one order magnitude on size there, but like the whole sun, if it was turned into a black hole, would only about 3 kilometers across. And the size of the event horizon that things can't pass through, escape through, pass through to get through the other side, is linear with mass, right? So you are talking about if you go from 3 kilometers across all the way down to just 3 meters across, that's a difference of 1,000 in the mass, that's all. That's not even down to the mass of Earth yet. You have to get very, very massive before you even get something the size of your hand, right? You're already up in the bigger than the moon mass, just to be the size of your hand. Not a good shield for anything you're trying to prevent from coming into you. Not a bad place to redirect things to if you can redirect them, but probably not just make them miss you entirely. In terms of using them as a power supply, though, as you're coasting through space, sucking gas in, and shooting it down that to provide that thrust, yeah. That's why we like black holes as potential spaceships to drive, either for the Hawking radiation for really tiny ones, or through that accretion disk where you get that matter energy conversion approach. So,
Kaga13 wants to know what your thoughts are on artificial gravity research and if it's doable in the near term.
Probably not. A person who discovered an artificial gravity method, though, would probably be, it's like the first person to really get a perpetual motion machine working. They'd be the next trillionaire, or the first trillionaire. And we see a trillionaire in my lifetime, so even without life extension. We do have an episode on that. It's the Clark Tech anti-gravity episode. We spend as much time talking about artificial as anti-gravity there. It is a really valuable technology if you can make it work. We see it mostly in science fiction for making sure that people don't float around the deck or have to explain why the ship's spinning. But I don't see many pathways for it. I know I used to like to play around with it in a lot of the sci-fi settings we develop as something like, instead of photovoltaics, you had photogravitonics or neutrino gravitonics, where something absorbs a photon or a neutron instead of producing light or electron, it produces a graviton. If the graviton is real, which all evidence currently seems to indicate is the case, then there should be some way to produce it, one would think. If you can do that, and some way to produce it non-omnidirectionally, then not only should you be able to produce artificial gravity, but you should be able to produce something like a tractor beam. That should be in the realm of science. The pathway to getting there, though, who knows?
Could unidirectional wormholes be possible? Asks Sonobello if they only allowed travel to places so far that you wouldn't be able to break causality with them.
Sure, that's one of the more popular concepts for that would be, actually that's another one we played around with a game setting that I'm not going to mention which one. If you could have a wormhole that shot you out 1,000 light years from here, then you could find the other end there. There's theoretically no causality issues. That's how you go down the time travel issue, though. I take the mouth that wormhole and I drag that other mouth back home. Now I actually have that time travel loop issue going on, but it's a closed time-like one, so it's not as bad. See our wormholes episode for more discussion of that, but the one-way traversable wormhole, mostly interested in terms of not going to other parts of our universe, but going to different universes. That's where the one-way traversable wormhole is interesting to us. There's no particular reason why in this universe a one-way traversable wormhole would be significant. You just make another one that went from there back. So it's just like a freeway, then you got two of them instead of one that you go up and down. But traversable one universe would be like, I make a black hole, and at that black hole's core is a wormhole that goes to another universe. I can never come back through it, but I can go out. Quite a leap of faith to go through one.
Yeah, really. 3 questions left here before the break. We have a super chat from James Morris. Thank you for your donation, James. What do you think will end disability first, BCIs or regenerative medicine, and how do you think they will interact?
It would depend a lot on which disability. Nerves. Well, okay. The idea behind a BCI ending a disability, and let's take a very specific case here. We'll go with prosthetic hand. We still have a lot of work to get done just to be able to make a prosthetic hand that can really emulate a human hand, that would actually have good temperature sensors, good pressure sensors. That would be a very crude thing initially. But in order to get that going, you need to be able to redo those nerve connections, which means somewhere in there, you have to either be able to put a pair of jumper cables or alligator clips in there, as it were, to get the connections from the brain, or get the brain to construct new ones, which is also a possibility. You see the BCI episode. Or you have to be able to regrow or grow in the first place. Some people obviously are born without the thing in the first place, so like no arm when you were born. You have to be able to actually put that in there. And either one is going to be the one that starts ending those kind of disabilities, and it's just a question of which one do we get first, more than which one is the one that's going to end it. So I would bet a combination of the two, though, because I think if you get a decent amount of like nerve regeneration going on, it probably won't be quite perfect, and you'll still need to have some BCI controlling in there. So
Isaac Bordeaux says, what will the science fiction genre look like when humanity is a K2 or K3 civilization?
it's possible it won't actually be around anymore. I mean, not every genre is what you might call eternal. Speculative fiction is, right? But just as an example, in the, I can't remember what the Golden Age and Silver Age specifically is, but new wave science fiction from like the late 60s and 70s, which gives some really good science fiction by folks like Roger's Lasting, one of my favorites. There was almost no real interest in hard science in those. It was more of a, here are some challenges that science might give us, and here's the effect it would have on culture. That kind of area should continue perpetually, but we could very easily hit a point where we have maxed out all of our science in a couple of centuries, regardless of whether we're K1, K2, K0, K3, etc. And at that point, you kind of expect the science fiction part of it, and you just have speculative fiction. But even then, you know, you start kind of guessing what's life in another universe like, what's the multiverse like. You still have those folks who are in science fiction traveling to other universes while you're only traveling to solar systems. So that would be the big change. You just won't see planetary science fiction stuff, and they'd still be like, well, what if we find FTL? So I don't really see the sci-fi genre eliminating itself anytime in the next few thousand years at least.
Last question before the break. Ozzymandis 2014. Would you book a suite for your 50th anniversary at blank? Insert corporate chain here, blank Lunar Resorts.
Only if they had moon bacon. And if you remember that old joke from the show, then points for you. That's what all old gags we haven't had around for a while. If it was actually the point that there was a resort that had people going in and out of it, then yeah, I would seriously be thinking about making a trip there, because I'm not one of those people who's really all that anxious to try out spaceflight personally. I don't ever need to be supposed to be planting a flag somewhere or things like that, but it still would be nice to actually go.
What about a lunar B&B?
A lunar B&B? No AO B&B there, because there's no AO at the lunar. So, I think that would be a neat thing to try. And obviously, our 50th anniversary would be
a few years.
Yeah, maybe 2070, wouldn't it? We'll see. All right. Well, we're going to go break for a few minutes, and we'll be right back with more of your questions. So we'll be on break for a few minutes so we can all grab a drink and a snack. And while we're on break, I thought we'd touch on our recent End of Earth episode. As regular viewers know, I write and record the episodes way in advance, typically 2-3 months before the video gets made, about a week or two before it airs, and often when doing the video overlays, more materials come to mind. This results in the occasional extended edition over on Nebula, which are sometimes trial balloons for follow-up episodes too, but for shorter ones we can use the livestream break, and in this case, we were looking at the various cataclysm scenarios for Earth. First though, I want to give a quick shout out to Guy Haley. His novel, Belisarius Cawl, The Great Work, is the first place I heard someone suggest that grey goo in a planet should result in compressed and dead molten layers of them. I'm not sure if he's the first to point that out or heard it elsewhere, but the novel actually has a lot of hard sci-fi gems in it, especially on concepts of post-human minds, which is a rarity in shared settings and space operas, which 40K certainly is. So kudos to him for that, and for many other enjoyable novels. The machines diverging into an ecosystem with predator-prey ideas discussed in that episode, though, is inspired by Gregory Benford's Galactic Central saga, which I also highly recommend. And with some spoilers, the nominal bad guys of that series are machine intelligences experimenting on how to survive proton decay. Now, I get asked to occasionally do a Civilizations at the End of Time episode on proton decay. It's probably the most requested new installment of that series after one focusing on the Big Rip, and I probably will do both at some point, but there's a reason we haven't done proton decay, and that's because it's strongly debated if it even happens. Proton decay was very central to a lot of grand unified theories over the years, and the basic notion is that while the standard model of particle physics has the proton as stable, never decaying, many theories like supersymmetry or SUSY predicted proton decay and had this idea at its core. Neutrons decay, they take about 12 minutes to do so on average, but electrons and protons have never been observed to decay.
However, we thought they might, and had a minimum half-life of something like a trillion years last I checked. I never liked it or the particle zoo of hypothetical particles we had going when I was in college, around the turn of the century, and it's probably a big factor in me not continuing on into nuclear physics in grad school. If you ever seen the college ring I wear with the atom engraved on the gemstone, my undergrad advisor at Kent State, Mark Manley, was a nuclear physicist, and while I inherited a great love of astrophysics from my mentor, I eventually acquired a heavy dislike for the seemingly infinite new cosmological theories and particle zoos that seemed to spring up left and right then, and thus didn't go into nuclear for grad school, even though that had been the plan at the time. The basic notion of particles vis-a-vis the end of the world or universe is that all matter is made out of protons, so if those decay, all normal matter would cease to exist within several half-lives of the proton. If that's 10 to the 34th years, by 10 to the 35th years, you would expect only about 1,000th of the prior matter to still exist, and by 10 to the 36 years, 100 half-lives, basically no matter whatsoever to exist, as 2 to the 100 is an absurdly huge number. Which would mean that even civilizations surviving by being digital and post-human and slowly trickling matter into black holes could only make it to this period, which is still a long time, as long to the current age of the universe as it is to a microsecond, but still long short of the lifetimes of even the smallest naturally occurring black holes, so it would prevent the scenarios we looked at in our black hole farming and ion stars episodes. Now mind you, that's the minimum half-life protons might have, and there's no evidence they have a half-life at all. It might be even longer if it does have one, but if it turns out to be real, you have to eventually alter your civilization to run on some sort of meson-based matter, or something running on positron-electron atoms, also called positronium, where an electron and its antiparticle of the positron form something akin to a hydrogen atom. This is possible and might make for a good episode in that series, but it's also something that could be how Earth ends, with all matter decaying as the protons did, and so I thought it probably deserved an honorable mention in that episode, which again came out this Thursday if you haven't seen it yet. And with all that said, let's get back to our show, and back to your questions.
And we're back.
Okay, our next question is going to be from Gravitacioni Manavar. Hi Arthur, and greetings from Serbia. What's your opinion on Bracewell probes being used in our solar system? I imagine something like the Centennial laying dormant and waiting to start communication with us.
Say Centennial or Sentinel?
Probably Sentinel.
Sentinel. Okay. There was a very classic story by Arthur C. Clarke that featured something called the Sentinel, which is kind of the prelude to the whole 2001 setting that we have with Stanley Kubrick later on. But Bracewell probe is similar to a von Neumann probe, but its purpose is basically go out, find life, and either chat with it, monitor it, go hunt it down, and if it's a berserker, blow it up. It's one of a long category of how would you send a robot out to do these things. And I have to be honest, when we talk about things like that, it does seem like such of a, the early generation of trying to look at interstellar arc ships and things like that, where you're thinking it's going to take 10,000 years to get to the nearest solar system because you're using rocket fuel or very simple nuclear propulsion, or where you're sending out a really dumb robot that's freakishly intelligent, kind of the Asimovian robot where it's amazingly sophisticated but stupid. That is not how AI is going to work out. You're either going to be sending things that are very parallel to human intelligence or very simplistic and are not even vaguely sapient. And we would probably just go ahead and qualify any probe like that as manned. See Dennis E. Taylor's increasingly classic We Are Legion, We Are Bob series for what that might actually look like, because he is he's a von Neumann probe, but also could be arguably a Bracewell probe too. Great book.
Thank you, Merv Johnson, for your super chat. And he says, if you had an Alcubierre ship and turned on the main rocket engines while in the warp bubble at faster than light, what would happen?
Yeah, I'd say call Miguel Alcubierre would probably have the best answer for that. I'm trying to think of what it might actually be. The Alcubierre warp drive is basically working on the assumption that we're going to suck space down in front of us while we're expanding space behind us. And then when we pass that, we'll go and expand it some more. It can't violate relativity because it's just changing space in front and behind it. There is no need for a drive on that ship because it's just coasting along that way. But I don't believe there's any particular reason why it'd have the inertia would actually be an issue, or it generating that. Behind it is a black hole for all practical purposes, though, so you might have some interesting effects off its rocket flame. I'm not too clear on how that would happen there, but it really shouldn't make that much of a difference.
Noah R. says, what date do you predict for the opening of the first O'Neill scale habitat?
Sometime in the 22nd century. It's kind of like the orbital ring when we talk about it, and so I'm thinking I might have a bad answer on that. It could be a warp drive. I think grain of salt on the last answer. I'll have to check that because I think that was right, but it's hard to think that one through on the top of my head. But getting back to the O'Neill cylinder. O'Neill cylinders and orbital rings are not technologically complicated devices. One is a spinning can, and the other is a hose that's just full of magnetic bits instead of, particles. You build them when you get to a certain scale where you need them, not because you can. When you have thousands and thousands of people living and walking in space every day, then you might start considering building a habitat that size. But then why, right? What's keeping them all in that one location? Why are they at that one as opposed to a bunch of other smaller ones? So realistically, I tend to think you're going to have to get to that point where you got 1 million people actively employed up in space, traveling back and forth every day. If we start talking about doing, tens of thousands of people launching space every day, that's when you start thinking being median and orbital ring. Pretty much same place for neocylinders too, I think. When you start getting to that point that the amount of space industry is on par with a smaller country, that's probably where you start seeing people considering building those things for living in, working in, vacationing in.
You may have already started to answer Brick Muppet's question with that, though. Thank you, Brick Muppet, for your super chat of $5. And he says, do you see any real advantages to settling Mars or Castillo as opposed to O'Neill cylinders and such?
What was the second one?
Callisto, I'm sorry.
Callisto? Okay. Callisto is one of the more interesting moons of Jupiter that gets mentioned less. So it's to focus on Ganymede, which is the biggest, or Europa, because it definitely has that subsurface ocean. Callisto probably has that same subsurface ocean, just not as impressive as Europa's. I would actually tend to think that Callisto would be the first one you colonize in the Jovian system, and probably that would be a place you would colonize. Mars, we were talking about the case for space and the earlier case for Mars book earlier by Robert Zubin, and you can go watch our Mars versus Moon episode for some of the ups and downs of it, but Mars is not a place that you colonize because you want to have a lot of new homes for people. It is not the new American frontier or something like that. It is one of many places you can potentially colonize. I do not think that it's going to turn out to be one of those places where you have millions and millions of people living until you already have millions and millions of people living in Earth orbit and on the moon and in the asteroid belt too.
I'm having trouble reading some of these ones with the bee sting, but the Canadian says, do you think it's worth using the waste from fusion to generate more power than the fusion itself?
Okay. When I take two hydrogen atoms, just regular plain vanilla hydrogen atoms, and I ram them together, one proton to another proton, I make deuterium. I can then fuse that deuterium again, and we often say deuterium is a lot easier to fuse to get me some tritium, helium, helium-3, whichever. And I can fuse those too. I can potentially fuse those into carbon. And then to fuse carbon into nitrogen, oxygen, silicon, or fluorine, any number of other things. Each of these steps produces more power. The question then becomes, would you take your hydrogen and just keep fusing it over and over and over again, so you already got it pressure, into you basically setting off a small supernova event inside it, in terms of what's going on, where you're converting stuff basically into ion. And that's the ideal. Although I suspect in most cases where you got things that well controlled, you'd probably just dump it down a black hole's accretion disk. Its neck to create a accretion disk instead. But that would be ideal. Probably a long way off though, because it just requires so much more control when we haven't even got to the point we can do deuterium, the easiest of these yet.
Querden 10 says, Isaac, do you think that the brain would have an eventual natural death if we could rule out physical deterioration through the use of spare bodies? And how do you think the brain would respond?
Yes. Every book has its epilogue. You're going to die. That is going to happen. But It may not happen in the next century. It may be a million years from now, or a billion years from now. But whatever you start defining, you first have to say, what am I? Not what's a human necessarily, though that's a good question. What am I, and where's the natural turning point for me? Because let's say I just keep adding to your brain. Let's say we do one of the pathways to biology, which is your brain just keeps growing bigger and bigger biologically. You go live in a microgravity environment, thoughts start taking a century apiece to happen, although they are great and profound. Or we make you post-digital, things like that. Post-human in digital format. There is a certain point at which your personality has so altered that it can't even be said to be you anymore. Or maybe you've merged into something else. There's always going to be certain endpoints. You start defining where is the endpoint for you. Years back, we did an episode called Digital Death that started looking at what the realistic half-life might be, so to speak, for a human that was using those methods of preservation. And I'd refer you to that because we discussed more of the options there.
Albert Jackinson says, "Good afternoon, Isaac. You've covered artificial black holes on this channel before. What artificial versions of other astronomical objects could be made, and what applications would they have, if any?"
Star Wars and planets would be the next two I tend to think of. Obviously we've talked a lot about making artificial planets, be that shell worlds or just natural coin ones that we've made manually. And Star Wars, obviously fusion would be an example of that too. Though, I was wanting to remind folks, with fusion, we don't have a problem recreating the conditions inside the sun. That would be the easy part. Problem is, if I take a few 100 tons of solar matter at the core that's actually doing the fusion, I barely have enough energy to run a local neighborhood on. It's not a lot of energy. It's very slow fusion. We need to go higher up to faster, higher pressure types of reactions to really do that. So it's arguable for fusion drive really is a artificial sun. And I think it was like a watt per ton of matter on a red dwarf or something like that, or less. See one of our fusion episodes with discussion of that. Other artificial phenomena, possibly supernovas, might be something you might actually generate, though more controlled. I don't know. There's potential value to things like magnetars or gamma ray bursts. Those might actually be interesting means of propulsion at some point, but that's the only things I could think of off the top of my head. The Big Bang would be a phenomenon we'd like to be able to replicate.
JP Ventura, thank you for your super chat, and he says, if life was to be found on any solar planet, would it be ethical to terraform it? Are we accidentally contaminating Mars with Earth life with drones?
The big problem with an ethics question is you actually have to start off by asking, what is the basis and source of my ethics? If I am saying that this planet we found has, say, Europa, let's say we crack Europa open and we find inside there is something like an amoeba, and we'll say debating whether or not it actually is running on DNA or not, might be some distant relative of ours, or completely different origin for it, etc., etc. And I'd say, well, we have to wait till we get all the science done, so obviously we're not going to get rid of that life. We got a lot of science to do. Except that's not really a good more answer to that question, because all you really said is it's getting a stay of execution because we want to learn. We have a selfish motivation for doing it. On the other hand, what we are talking about there is a simple amoeba. I don't care about it anymore. I care about the ones in my yoga culture. So I don't know where the lines are on that, but you have to start by figuring out why is this life in some way precious, and that's where you can start drawing those conclusions. At the moment, though, you can say if we find these things, we won't screw with them too much because the scientific value is so enormous, so there's just a utilitarian moral basis for keeping it around initially.
Do black holes usually rotate clockwise or counterclockwise?
Not a right answer, not a right question. Everything in the solar system rotates clockwise around the sun, and the sun as well, with a couple of very minor exceptions, because the net angular momentum of the solar system happens to be going in that direction. The galaxy has a net angular momentum too. However, clockwise and counterclockwise are based on whether you're up or down. Particle physics, we have spin types, but those aren't really real analogies for this universe. So whether you're clockwise or counterclockwise, it's just which angle you're looking at, up or down. And so from some people's perspective, it would seem to be going clockwise. But it just depends where you're at, what the net angular momentum is, because in general, whatever the net angular momentum in a region is, that is what most things are going to spin as, and with time, what everything would spin as it evens out.
C.R. Smith says, what is the future of terror weapons? If I remember correctly, the xenomorph was a biological weapon made by the Prometheans. Is that at all possible? And what else can you think up?
Alien was a great movie. Aliens was also a great movie. Predator was an awesome movie. I wish they had mixed those series together. It's like when they do RoboCop versus the Terminator in a lot of comic books. It's like don't mix those. They did do a decent job. I thought the Prometheus movie was actually fairly decent, but after that, they were interested in looking at this complex alien life form where they were willing to sacrifice the crew to bring it home. To spoil us for the plot, is not a good weapon. They blow them away left and right in the Aliens movie. The Space Marines, they are just mortaring them left and right. They do very well against most of the unarmored people and unweaponized people. They are terrifying predators, but they're not really any better of a weapon than a lion or a shark is. Would you like to weaponize those? No, not really, because a tank is better, you know? So I wouldn't expect that to be the kind of biological life form people use. I really don't know if I'd ever say that, because you get this blurry line between self-replicating machinery and biology at higher levels of science, that either one obviously has its value as a weapon, but I tend not to think of gray goo or self-replicators, biological or artificial, as very good weapons. They're more like very good means of deploying systems of weaponry, you know, by building them.
Jamal Anusa says, hi Arthur, greetings from Ghana. My question is, with private entities leading the way, do you think corporations are likely going to take over the role of government when it comes to space colonies?
We recently did a collaboration with What If Art History, and that seems like a question more in his line. You could look at the history of something like the East India Company, or any number of companies that were operating in what we call the colonial regions. They were in Africa, South America, Jakarta, Indonesia. Obviously, you have a large organization whose main goal is profit. They cannot really serve in a governmental role. That's got to shift over. But kind of same for governments. You have a priority that your organization exists for. As I like to remind people, we started using the word corporation to mean for-profit companies only. Corporation is the term that says basically that we're going to take a group and make it a real thing, right, for a purpose. The village you live in is a corporation. It's incorporated. If you live in a village, the city is incorporated. Many of the non-profit groups you'd be familiar with, like the Red Cross, these are corporations. You cooperate with a purpose in mind. And so if your goal is to be a colony maker, then you probably are not cooperating specifically for profit motive explicitly or as your chief priority. Assume whatever the goal of a given group is, that is going to be what they make their main push for. And if your main push is colonization, that's what it's going to be for.
Great question, Jamal. Next we have Sahan Yasar, and he wants to know what would be the most memorable moment of this century of space exploration if asteroid mining started.
The most memorable moment of space colonization in this century if asteroid mining started?
Yeah, this century.
Well, I can give you a couple options. One would be they dragged the asteroid back and it fell out of control and landed on the planet. That would be memorable.
That would be bad.
But memorable. Two would be that time where they have the pod land from the first gold mining thing and the big, song and dance while they got the cameras in there, open it up and behold, vast supplies of gold balls from space. And I could definitely see an Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos type personality making quite the big show out of that unveiling, or Tony Starkish, I should say. We'll picture Tony Stark doing that instead. You can imagine he'd make quite a show out of it. I would say that would probably be the two big memorable moments that would probably come out of something like that offer them up as just really sticking out.
JP Ventura, thank you for your super chat. He wants to know if you have watched Terraforming Venus episodes on the
Kurzgesagt?
Yep, channel, and he says it's scary that it reminds Earth 4.5 billion years ago with an artificial moon creation.
I haven't had occasion to watch that episode yet. I'm told that it basically takes the Birch model we looked at in Winter on Venus and discussed it briefly. So I have not had occasion to see that episode yet.
Chris K says, is there any incentive to visit any other stars close to ours other than the Centauri system?
I'm sorry, one more time?
Is there any incentive to visit any other stars close to ours other than the Centauri system?
What's the advantage of going to Alpha Centauri? It's because you got the same one for Tau Ceti or for Bernard Star or Epsilon Eridani or Delta Pavonis. All of these solar systems nearby us offer potential vast amounts of new worlds and resources and new homes. That's the incentive. It's as true to them as the other ones, but that's probably the one. If you mean which one should we visit first, I would say Alpha Centauri, probably Proxima specifically, but does it just makes sense. It's the shortest trip, and there's a lot of resources probably there. There's bound to be planets there.
Bernadette Swick says, what is the biggest challenge facing airship to orbit projects?
I think the biggest thing, and we talked about this in the Sky Platforms episode, people kind of get the idea that we can lift up a rocket into the air and then launch it on the back of a balloon. That's an option, and it would save you fuel, but there's so much coordination to doing that. And there are some amazing potential ways to do that. Again, we looked at some in Sky Platforms that were pretty impressive, being able to lift up very large objects into the upper atmosphere. Fundamentally, though, if you want to be in orbit, you have to actually speed up, and because otherwise you're just hanging in the air. And like an orbital ring permits you to do that because you can run around on that track with a supply of energy right there to fuel you, and no air slowing you down. Mass Driver does that same trick, and but when you get to space towers, when you get to airships, you have to actually have some way to get that ship moving at orbital speed. Otherwise, you're just floating, and that's not really what you want to be doing there.
David B says, Hey Isaac, did you watch the Tomorrow War yet? And if so, how well do you think the invader monster predators were made?
I watched the first minute of it. It kept getting poked at me with Amazon Prime, but we ended up watching Hell's Kitchen instead. And I was
as you could see on Facebook, the Hell's Kitchen episode has resulted in some marvelous creations.
Oh, yeah. Well, I still don't really watch a lot of TV, neither does Sarah, but we've been trying to do some classic sci-fi. We watched the first episode of Battlestar Galactica yesterday, the original Battlestar Galactica. The one green is awesome. And it was nice to kind of catch up on that, but then we were watching Columbo this early afternoon. Lots of TV shows in the past I want to catch up on before I start looking out some new ones, I suppose.
Rexy the Hound says, are you concerned about population collapse with falling birth rates across the globe projected to get worse and worse this century?
Because the people projecting these things keep proclaiming it does not actually make it even vaguely right. People who do population projections just keep getting them wrong. They always get them wrong. You can project it for a decade out because you know what the behavior mostly is. You're not going to be off that much because it's easy to guess. You can't be off by more than 1%. When I was a little kid, they said that by the year 2020, or whatever it was, it changed a lot. We'd have 16 billion people, and we'd all be cannibalizing each other. Like a decade ago, they said we're going to have the population drop off. It was 6 billion at the turn of the century. We're 8 billion in a year or two. And they say, well, the population sure has started declining. Last century, it doubled twice in 100 years. In the last 50 years, it's doubled exactly once in 50 years. Populations grow as long as they can comfortably do so. That is how that works. The fact that some countries are having their population growth rates decline a little bit probably is attributable to many other factors. Most of the worlds are having a population increase. And I don't see any reason why that would stop being the case as long as they have the resources to do that. I really do not like a lot of the groups that are projecting the population growth or decline. They might be right, but not from good, solid, proper analysis. I think that they cherry pick a lot, a very great deal. The population is continuing to rise, and I will believe that it's going to stop growing as soon as we have 10 years in a row where the population growth rate is less than 0.1%.
Super chat from El Fernandez, and he says, how's it going? Thank you for your super chat. And the last question will be from Mr. Gunznatter. He says, hello from Scotland, Arthur. Of all the myriad fusion power programs, which approach do you think will be successful?
Well, I mean, kind of all of them are semi-successful, and will be successful in certain other details. But the Tokamak is the classic. It's my only favorite. There's a lot of ones I like. The Polywall is beautiful. Obviously, we always like Laser Ignition, but the Tokamak is always got my money on it as the best option. Figuratively, though, because I'm not going to invest in fusion resource. That's what governments do right now.
Hey, I just found one more question. If you've got.
Sure. Yeah.
Fran Bhutan says, if the rotor of an orbitable ring breaks up at a single point, will it crash into the Earth or fly away into space?
A space elevator, if you cut it, will have it fly away above the cut, and the rest will fall back down. That's how a space elevator works. An orbital ring, if you break it, is going to start falling through the atmosphere, where the terminal velocity is usually about 100 miles an hour, depending on your architecture. When it crashes, it's not going to leave a crater the way an asteroid would. It will leave a hole directly underneath it, possibly a little bit wider than it is. So if you go build an orbital ring that's like a kilometer across, when that comes down, it's going to shake the Earth, right? But if you have one that's only 10 meters across, then anyone who's actually living directly underneath it or within maybe 100 meters is in danger, potentially. Big thing, though, is we have ways of slowing objects down. You put bolts in it that cause the sections to separate, explosive boom, and then you probably have, some parachutes deploy on it. I think we discussed that in the orbital rings episode, and it could just slow down more. But it's going to fall down on your house the same way an electrical wire would, in terms of being some damage, but might not even kill the people inside that house. It just depends how big the orbital ring is. They're not asteroids. They're coming in at terminal velocity, not asteroid velocity. Any others, or are we done for the...
That was the...
Okay. Last question for the day.
Last question for the day. It's after 5 o'clock.
It is after 5 o'clock Eastern time.
My eyes are swelling shut. I can't read any more questions.
I'll go get you some more antihistamines. I'm going to get out of the suit jacket. And we are going to see you all on Thursday. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a great week.
So that will wrap us up for the day. I want to thank everyone for joining us, and again, if we didn't get your question, feel free to post as a comment below, and I'll try to get to it this evening. Also, you can continue the conversation at any of the forums on Facebook, Reddit, Discord, or our website, isaacarthur.net. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you Thursday.